It's that famous Steve Jobs quote, like you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. Like you have to follow your nose, you have to follow your intuition, and like if you stranded in a forest somewhere, no amount of strategy is going to get you out of there. The only way is like you've got to just take one step forward and navigate yourself out of this, because you have no idea what's coming down the road.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Boardroom Conversations, the WATPROP Business Podcast. Today we have Ross, who's the founder and CEO of Versofy. We're going to be unpacking his early entrepreneurial journey as well as the Versofy story. Thank you for joining us for another episode. I'm your host, Justin Watkins. Just a quick one, before this episode begins, please like, share and subscribe. We're on YouTube and Spotify. Please follow us to keep up to date with the latest episodes. Ross, thank you so much for taking the opportunity to come onto the Boardroom Conversation, the WATPROP Business Podcast today. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for slicing out some time in your busy schedule to speak to me and obviously share the Versofy story. Obviously, Versofy is really the holding company with lots of different avenues in which you guys are addressing problems in. Just really thank you for coming onto the podcast today.
Cool, yeah, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Fantastic. So just as a starting point, before we jump into the Versofy story, there's obviously your personal story of how you ultimately arrived at starting Versofy. So just walk us through your upbringing and your entrepreneurial spirit that was being shown at a very early age that ultimately gave you the foundation to start Versofy.
Yeah, so I come from a family of entrepreneurs. My dad's always owned his own businesses. He's always been doing various things. He had his business for 30, 40 years, so he had like one core business, but a lot of peripheral stuff around those businesses. So got exposed to it from a young age. My sister's owns her own business. My brother-in-law owns his own business. So there was I had zero intention of ever working for a corporate ever. I was exposed to that from a young age, and I studied a professional degree. I studied civil engineering with not much ambition of becoming a civil engineer, to be honest, but I love the problem solving. I love the civil aspect of it, of building things, I'm very strong and enjoy maths and science and physics and those type of things. So I love my degree and I love my studies, but I could never picture myself working for like a big civil company. I was always destined to do my own thing, really. I think it was written in the stars.
Fantastic. And then in terms of like understanding that you had this entrepreneurial spirit, where did you almost start dabbling a little bit with entrepreneurship to almost lay the foundation for yourself?
Yeah, I think I've always, and my wife always laughs at me, I always look at how things make money. I'm intrigued, and I'm doing maths in my head constantly to be like, you go to a play at Monte Casino, and you start counting how much did we pay for tickets. You start counting the rows. You're trying to like work out the revenue. I've always had that. That's the way my mind works. I'm very logically and mathematically driven, and I've always enjoyed problem solving and looking at opportunities. I'm not the traditional kind of flipping burnt CDs at school, like making money at school, hustle kind of entrepreneur, but always valued a hard day's work, worked in bars, those type of things, student type jobs, but always thinking about how you can create an opportunity. An example of that is I went and did a ski season post-university, earning minimum wage as a ski technician in a ski rental shop. And then on the side, me and my housemates started a snow kind of removal business where we would shovel snow for people. And got to the point where the one guy had a car. We then employed other people to do the snow removal labor, and we did the marketing, and we would go drop off flyers and do cold calling and whatnot. And like in the space of literally a couple of weeks, we had grown a mini business just for our pocket money. And I just love that kind of process of starting something from scratch and building it and getting traction and getting that early wind in the sails. Like, I love that. It's addictive.
Wow. So there was a business that you started prior to starting Versofy Solar. It was the drink business at stadiums, and walk us through how that all started and how that probably provided you with a really good setup in order to kind of go the Versofy route.
Yeah, so I didn't actually start that business. I traveled after varsity, traveled kind of throughout South and Central America, came back for my sister's wedding, was back in South Africa for, 2-3 months, and then was off again, went to the Caribbean, jumped on not a cruise ship, a super yacht, worked on the yachts. And then when I came back, I had to now start working, and I had an opportunity to go work at my dad's business, and just didn't want to do that in the same vein. Like, I just didn't want to have a job. And my brother-in-law had bought this business, Major Tom, but was running it on the side. So they were just doing it like weekend works, and they needed a jockey to go and run it. So bought into that business, bought equity into that business, not knowing anything about anything, didn't know the difference between a quote and an invoice or anything, but took on the challenge. I had, as I said, like a guaranteed paycheck at my dad's company versus let's try this thing, no guarantee of anything, earning zero money, and I just wanted to do that. And it had not much. I mean, it had some foundational stuff, but again, it was like a sideline business for them. And I came in, did the website, logo, found our first kind of customers, and really jumped into that. And it was the best thing that could have ever happened to me, because learned very quickly how to make money. So there were two parts of that business. The one part was eventing, and it was on risk. So we'd go to Pirates Rugby Club on a Saturday morning and sell beer out of a backpack and buy a keg of Castle Lager, and for whatever, 1,000 rand, and try and sell as many drafts as possible to cover that keg. And I remember the first few jobs we made a loss on like every job, and it was humbling, because you're working hard and it's manual labor and you're trying to make that sale, and then you start to work things out, and it evolved more into the other side of the business, which was eventing in the form of activation. So we would get paid up front. So we'd do things for coffee companies, as an example, and give away free coffee, but we knew what we were going to make up front. There was no risk to it. And then just learned how to sell to sell to corporates, to kind of promote ourselves there. And just dovetail between those two kind of business models, really. And the on-risk stuff, I mean, as much as it's on risk and you can lose money, the risk part, you can also make a lot of money. So, we ended up getting into the Dome, which is now a car dealership. But back in the day, it was where all the events were. Had a great relationship with the guy who ran the food and beverage there, and eventually we just became residency effectively there. So every single concert, every event that happened at the Dome, we would come in at risk and sell either coffee or beer or both. And it was a great way to make money, all cash at that stage. So like learning how, it's like super tangible around input costs, profit margins, got to pay your labor on the day. And it was just like a very, very good hands-on experience to learn how business models work. And then as you grow, you start to learn, oh shit, there's provisional tax. Oh, well, now I need to, pay money to the taxman that I haven't earned yet. And like all these little learnings that you learn very, very quickly by doing. I did a few corporate finance courses at varsity, and you think by reading in a textbook, but nothing beats hand-on practical experience. And it was just a great feeding ground for me. And that story ended quite well. We exited the business kind of 2.5 years after I joined it, for a very good return relative to kind of what we bought in on. The kind of return on equity was good. And yeah, I think I learned more in that 2.5 years than I ever would have learned doing an MBA or doing any of those type of kind of academia type courses, I think. So yeah, it was a great opportunity and great experience.
Incredible. And that obviously laid a very good foundation from there to kind of start the whole Versofy idea. So where was the idea for Versofy kind of birthed from? You obviously had exited that business now. Was it something you had been eyeing? Was it something that you wanted to pursue, or did it just kind of come out of the blue?
So it overlapped a little bit. So once we had made the decision to sell, I then sold the business but had to stay in as a bit of like an earn-out kind of construct, and also allow the new guys to come in and hand over effectively. But once this chapter's coming to an end, you start to kind of think what the next thing is. And this would have been in 2014. So the kind of Web 2.0 was kicking off at that stage, mobile phones, applications, Uber, Airbnb, this kind of like shared economy marketplace was starting to come to the surface. And in that time, in that kind of same time, there just seemed to be this boom of storage facilities were popping up everywhere. And I think it was just alongside the rise of, these apartment buildings and complexes that were going up, and people were moving to the city and needed some place to store goods. So the original idea of Versofy was actually what became Versofy was actually a storage aggregation website. I was super keen to dabble in the tech space. I've had an affinity for kind of technology and obviously seeing these stories coming out of Silicon Valley, wanted to be a part of that, and built this website, not knowing anything about anything, put together a spec, found some developers, did a partnership with the development house and built a company called Storage Scanner, which was an aggregation site for storage websites. And it was a glorified directory listing, actually, at the end of the day. And what we found when I say I found in that time was there was like two polar opposites in the storage kind of industry. There was like the listed entities, storage, extra space, these were like listed big landlords effectively, and then there was the mom and pop shop with a padlock on a gate with a handwritten cardboard sign saying call this number if you're looking for storage, and like not much in between. So it was like quite polar, which was interesting. And what I found was, so basically what the site was a storage site where you would put in your attributes of what you were looking for. So as an example, if you needed boat rental, it would need to be on the ground floor, it would need to be at a certain dimension, and would need to be kind of within a reasonable distance from the Vaal or Harties or wherever you're keeping your boat, effectively. And you would put in what you were looking for, and then it would display the results based on your kind of input, not dissimilar to Google and whatnot. And what we found was only like the top 3 people would get the hits, like with Google. So then we tried to randomize it. We tried different ways to kind of spread the love, because the model was a pay-per-lead kind of model with the end user, or with the supplier being the storage facility. And what we also found was a lot of these guys had long waiting lists. They were like at capacity and cool, we can't help you type of a thing. So it created quite a frustrating user experience. Like, you find the place that you're looking for, then you phone the guy just to be like, well, I can't actually help you type of a thing. So that was when there was a bit of a penny drop moment to say, why not take what the brief is and then just send it to all of the storage facilities on our book, and let the guys who've got facility or got space, got availability that's in their price range, they're looking for customers, let them call you as opposed to the other way around. And that's where this kind of idea of reverse classifieds came in. Wow. And then it was at that point, so what I learned quite quickly is I came from this eventing background, and my dad is in exhibitions, so it was like he had a lot of contacts in the eventing and exhibition space. I'd built a lot of contacts in this eventing business major, Tom, that I'd kind of been running for the last 2.5 years. And then I went into a completely new industry where I knew nobody. I couldn't walk into kind of, Storage's boardroom and go and meet with the CEO or the marketing manager or whoever that I needed to get my product off the ground. So I just thought, actually, you know what, storage was a good idea. There's like a boom in this industry, but I can't actually service this industry. Why not make this for all categories, and focused to begin with on the eventing space, because I could go and get the supply side of the marketplace quite easily. And that was where kind of Versofy, we quickly pivoted away from storage scanner, kind of mothballed it completely, and was like, okay, we're doing a new thing. Again, we being a team of one at that point in time, and Versofy was born, and that's basically where the name came from, is verso, reverse, the Latin kind of root for reverse, phi, classify, and I wanted to make it a verb, so needed to versify it, and that was the origin of the name, and that's when that pivot happened, and that was probably about 2015, made that call, so about a year into the journey, maybe 6 months into the storage journey. Made the call, then had to rebuild the sites completely, because now it was no longer a directory site, it was actually a marketplace that we were building, and we needed to build the demand side of the marketplace and the supply side of the marketplace. Started with the supply side, the logic being, there's no point you coming to my website and not being able to get serviced. So went and found a whole bunch of suppliers, literally took the yellow pages and created categories. We had 350 categories around that number. Anything from, like super professional architects, through to, whatever at the end of the thing. We had dog walkers, we had people who did magicians for kids' parties, like literally everything. And then the logic was exactly the same. There's no point, and I always use the example of a wedding. There's no point going on Google, finding a wedding photographer, videographer, whatever it may be, falling in love with their style, their when you found the one, and then finding out that either they're out of your budget or they've booked up on your wedding day, because that's the constraint with events. So the thought was, okay, cool, I'm getting married on such and such a date. This is my budget, this is my style, this is the venue, this is like the brief of the wedding. And then we'd sent that lead to all of our wedding kind of photographers on our database, and we allowed them to then pitch you as the consumer. So it was kind of like a hippo, but for professional services, and that was the birth of what Versofy 1.0 was effectively.
Wow, it's absolutely remarkable, because it's, when you look at how you had to innovate, as one thing didn't work, or perhaps you didn't have the leads or the contacts in that space, you almost had to keep kind of changing it in order to be in line with your expertise and with kind of what your experience had given you to ultimately run the business more effectively, in a sense.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, we all, it's that famous Steve Jobs quote, like you can't connect the dots looking forward, you can only connect them looking backwards. Like, wow. You have to follow your nose, you have to follow your intuition, and like, if you stranded in a forest somewhere, no amount of strategy is going to get you out of there. The only way is like, you got to just take one step forward and navigate yourself out of this, because you have no idea what's coming down the road. And often you have to kind of backtrack. It's like, if you to use the analogy of summiting a mountain, like, you could use a lot of effort to get to what you think is the summit and the peak, only to realize that, oh shit, I need to go down again, because I can't get to the top here. So you almost need to like backtrack, go back. And a lot of people don't do that, because it's a sunk cost fallacy, where you're like, I've put so much effort to get to here, I need to keep going. But you can't actually keep going on this road, because it's a dead end road and you will never get to the summit. So you need to almost like be like, okay, cool, let's go back, let's recalibrate, and then let's find our next route forward. And that's what entrepreneurship is. There is no like recipe, there is no blueprint. You just need to learn through experience. and you just get better at it as you go. It's like, another good analogy is like a video game. Like you find it very hard to pass this level, but once you've passed it once, if you go and redo it, it's like easy. It's like child's play, right? And like you just got to keep going and learn. And like a lot of people stop and then they start something new, and then they just never get past a certain plateau or level, because all they're doing is they're in this little cycle. Whereas like you got to figure out getting through that barrier, and then you just level up as you go, really. Wow. And I've got a long way to go still, sure. But I do think it's stood me in good stead. If I had to start a business tomorrow, I would be extremely confident of what route I'm going to take, what's my first step, how I'm going to do things, what matters, what doesn't matter, because we all fall into the trap of like the logo design and the name, and you procrastinate on what actually matters, and that's going out and getting customers and learning from them, and you're trying to get this perfect polished product which doesn't exist. So it's innovation by necessity, really, is the way I look at it.
Wow, that's so profound. So in light of that, obviously you had created this reverse classifieds. You were obviously sending the leads to the various service providers, and they would ultimately reach out to the customer. How did that evolve from there into what it is today?
It's a long story, because that was about a 4-year journey. We went live on the 1st of April 2016, I'll never forget. And there was a lot of evolution in that business model. We learned a lot through that process, but I don't want to waste too much time on that. But ultimately, long story short, was we iterated the business model, we changed different things, we narrowed our categories again and again. So we started, as I mentioned, at like 350 categories. By the time we'd found really good traction, we were down to maybe 15, but only 3 were like the 90% of our revenue was coming from like 3 main categories. And that was 2019, we'd started to find some really good traction. So like 3 years of trial and error, hard graft, like trying to figure this thing out. Started to get some traction, and then COVID hit. 2020, like Feb 2020 was a record month for us. March 2020, government shut down. Our professional services were all SMEs, basically, who were no longer allowed to work. So our business model just came to a grinding halt, like immediately. And bit of panic, like you don't know what to do. Now it's lockdown, there's so much uncertainty in the world, no one knows what's going on. We'd just hired so it was myself and my partner, and then we'd hired 2 salespeople. Like we'd hired them literally like in the January of that year. Fortunately, they resigned actually just before. With COVID, they saw opportunities in hand sanitizer like everybody else. So just like they saw the writing on the wall, and fortunately we didn't have to go through any kind of retrenchment processes or anything like that, which was great that we dodged that. But we just used that time from the March of that year till probably the May, June, so like 2-3 months to be like, okay, what are we going to do? And in that time, we still had all these customers in the form of our suppliers. So the supplier side of the market, obviously the demand side being the end consumer, there was no activity at all. But there was a few select ones who had built good relationships. So we were trying to like, how can we help you during COVID? So we built websites for them, and we just did stuff to just try to keep the lights on, really, all now working remotely from home. And it was during that kind of what next workshopping that we were doing was like, let's actually, every time if we reflected on like all of our little upticks of success was when we narrowed our focus. So as I said, we went from like 350 categories down to 200, down to 1. And every time we like narrowed our focus, we got a better little uptick and more traction. And we just thought like, actually, all of our kind of revenue in that 90% was coming from the solar category, the borehole category, and the rainwater harvesting category. So we're like, let's actually strip it down to one category. We picked solar for numerous reasons. I love the space still do, obviously, had the most legs. And now this is 2020, so this is post load shedding. I mean, load shedding started in 2008, but it wasn't anywhere near what was coming down the line at all. I think there was like 20 days of load shedding in 2020 as an example, so it was like pretty negligible. But we're still seeing good traction there because it was quite a high ticket item, and there's like the early adopters were coming through in the solar space. It was like also pre-lithium ion batteries, and the technology was at the precipice of changing. So we picked solar and we said, okay, cool, what is the problem to solve for solar? And it wasn't necessarily lead generation, which is what we've been doing for the last 4 or 5 years for these guys. It's like actually the biggest barrier to entry for solar for the end user was the price point. So, it's 150,000 Rand, 200,000 Rand, 250,000 Rand. Like, not everybody's got that lying around. It's just been COVID as well. So like there's a lot of kind of financial strain on people. One of the nice benefits was obviously interest rates dropped significantly during that period. And we're like, let's actually just go hammer and tongs at one thing. Let's change Versofy to Versofy Solar. We're going to focus on one thing, and the main thing we're going to try and solve is drop the barrier of entry for the consumer. So how do we do that? Okay, well, the biggest pain point is the price tag. How do we break that up into manageable monthly amounts? And then we just kind of started asset finance, try to figure out how to do that. And yeah, that was kind of the origin story.
So other than load shedding, I mean, what makes South Africa so well primed for the solar application?
Well, yeah, I mean, look outside. The weather, for one, is perfect. Super sunny country, the sun shines the majority of the year. Rising electricity costs is a major issue. Our reliance on Eskom, notwithstanding load shedding, Eskom, it is slowly starting to change, but the vast majority of the way they generate power is through dirty fossil fuel coal. We are now in a generation where we are seeing the effects of carbon, carbon emissions and climate change, etc., and there needs to be a shift. And there has been a worldwide shift, so solar is topical worldwide. But where load shedding has played a very good part, aside from the demand it's created for the category, is in the rest of the world, outages aren't an issue. So battery technology is not like a huge thing in the rest of the world. It's very quickly becoming it because outages are happening worldwide now, and we were almost just like the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the world. But what's been great to see is South Africa's become like the testing ground for these new technologies and hybrid inverters, and a lot of our kind of OEM partners that we work with are now designing inverters and technologies that are now getting adopted in the rest of the world, but they started because of our issues that they're solving. So it's like super cool byproduct, I suppose, of load shedding. And I think also just another reason why solar is so popular here is South Africans have big homes. We're not apartment dwellers like New York City or London or whatnot. The sun shines, there's an abundance of roof space, and the people care about the environment and nature. And I'm fortunate enough to have traveled quite a bit, and nothing compares to Africa when it comes to the outdoors, nothing. There's a hands down the best wilderness, etc. So I think people just have a natural affinity to protecting that. Wow. And yeah, I think that's a big driver of the adoption here.
Wow, that's so fascinating, because I think a lot of people just view solar as this, perhaps this concept that's been implemented because of load shedding, where it's really being driven by so many different factors that ultimately underpin it. If you think about even the customer, they choosing to go the solar route, even if load shedding right now is not a thing, they're still choosing to go that route for all the reasons you've mentioned and even more.
Yeah, 100%. And it's don't get me wrong, load shedding is the main driver, or was the main driver. Cost cutting is now the main driver, but it's a beautiful byproduct that you get. You feel good about yourself. There's a feel good factor. The green element is a byproduct of it. And there are people who make that choice because of it, and those were our early adopter customers because it actually wasn't cost saving at that time, but it was good for the environment and whatnot. But it's just such a nice industry to be in, because not only does it help you reduce your disruption with outages and load shedding, which we all experience, and that's like super disruptive, as we all know as South Africans, like crippling. One, two, it lowers your costs, which is great. I'll get into kind of our commercial offering in a bit, but like that's a great driver. Like just lowering your input cost benefits the whole value chain ultimately. And then thirdly is that environmental element, which is huge. And I learned this quite early on. I did my thesis at Varsity on green roofs and sustainable drainage systems and the benefits that those have on the environment, as they drop kind of the urban temperatures and surface runoff and like all the bad things that happen with big urban areas. And I always like wondered why it wasn't more widely adopted, but only when doing my thesis and actually speaking to people and government agencies, and they were just saying like, when there's 50% unemployment and people don't know where their next meal is coming from, and there's gender-based violence, and there's so many other issues, environmental stuff comes last. And that's a fact. Like, I mean, look at the rest of the world. Like, the people want to live tomorrow. They're not worried about, the next generation when they don't know where their next meal is coming from. So if you can tick both of those boxes, and you can really help people with their pockets and help with their businesses, and there's a great byproduct, that's like a 1 and 1 makes 3 kind of scenario, which is amazing to be a part of that industry.
100%. And in terms of the commercial offering, obviously you've mentioned like reducing costs. So like a province like the Western Cape, you're allowed to feed back into the grid. Where do you see that basically starting to come on a more like national scale in terms of feeding back into the grid? Like in Johannesburg, I mean, it would be great. I mean, you've got lots of shopping centers that ultimately they're benefiting when the sun's shining, but they can't actually put that back into the grid, that excess power that's being generated by the panels or by the batteries or whatever it may be. Where do you see that changing for us?
Well, it's a good question, because that's how the majority of the rest of the world works, and there's a level of cooperation that is required from governments and policymakers, etc., which hasn't been forthcoming in South Africa, because I think for political reasons, Eskom wants to hold on to the monopoly it has. So that to me is the most exciting kind of thing for the future, is like, how do we make it that people can cooperate, and you have the shared economy where it's like, I'm away, I'm not here, our business is closed today on a Saturday, why not sell my excess power to you who is open on a Saturday at a cheaper rate than they would get elsewhere? And you kind of create this like shared economy, cooperative kind of environment, and it's possible. It's that's the beauty of this technology, is these kind of, we can all talk to one another, and we can create these mini grid and microgrid kind of environments. But at the moment, it's not viable in a lot of the places in South Africa, because the cost of the meter, one, is prohibitively expensive. Two, the amount of money you get paid to feed back in the grid with your excess power isn't enough to kind of offset your cost of that meter. It's going to take you 10 years just to pay back the meter. So until such time as they drop those costs, they make it a little bit more, they bring the parity a little bit closer. I do worry that the adoption is not going to be huge, but I do think that's the exciting kind of challenge to solve, because everybody wins if we solve it correctly.
Sure. And would you be, like, as a company, would you be driving that adoption? Because I mean, it would benefit you greatly. The more people that adopt solar, the more people can feed back into the grid, the more cost savings they'll ultimately generate.
Hugely. That's our goal. That's what we're trying to do, is to say, like, how do we make, like when I was putting the decks together to kind of go raise money for this initiative, like one of the kind of bullet points was, you shouldn't need to have solar on your roof to be able to benefit from solar and clean energy. So you want to create this ecosystem where it doesn't matter if you've got a south-facing roof or a thatch roof, or you live in an apartment block. Everybody should be able to benefit from renewables and clean energy, and that's like a big part of what we're trying to solve at a much more macro level. But the beauty is you can do it it's so modular, you can do it in a complex level, as an example, and then start to balance loads. And we're starting to see some really cool technology that in a complex construct where there's shared roofs, having a centralized battery system, having geysers that talk to one another, like that's happening immediately, and like that's something that we're very keen and excited to be a part of, because everybody wins. There's so much waste in the system, same with water, that you don't necessarily need to solve the problem by adding generation. You just need to be more efficient with how it's getting consumed, really.
Wow. And obviously you've mentioned water now, and one of the opportunities that you guys have seen is, Johannesburg in particular has very much a water crisis in terms of the way it's distributed, the infrastructure is crumbling. How are you guys, obviously you've addressed the solar part and you're addressing the solar part, but you've seen an opportunity on the water side now. How are you guys addressing the water, perhaps issues that people are experiencing in terms of backup water? Maybe talk a little bit to that.
Yeah, so the scariest stat there is it's not a supply problem. There's 50% of the water that leaves the treatment plants and the facilities ends up at its final destination. So the rest is lost in the system through leakage, through so it's a huge problem, but it's a relatively easy problem to solve. Our solve at the moment is really to keep our consumers and our customers' lifestyles at the level that they should be in 2025 in the world we live in. So our kind of entry point into the category is really quite a simple backup and filtration offering. So your standard tanks, and then cleaning the water before it enters into your home. That's our entry point, and we've been quite deliberate about that being the entry point, because to try and solve the whole problem from the get-go is tough. There's like a lot that we can learn, and trying to keep it super simple to begin with. But the ambition is to start to grow into, can we start to harvest water? Can we take from boreholes as an example and filter that, so there's less pressure on the grid itself, so that even if we don't fix, or if the municipalities don't fix their supply or their infrastructure problem, that it just services less people, and therefore there's less pressure on the system. But that's not a solution. That's not a sustainable solution. We want to cooperate with municipalities to say, how do we actually fix the infrastructure? Does it make sense to lay a new grid perhaps, and not dissimilar to the way the guys that fiber, just you have all these telephone poles, and now someone is like, actually Vumatel, I'm just going to dig a trench in the ground and we're going to just build our own infrastructure. Like that's something very exciting to look at with water. Not dissimilar way it gets distributed in terms of digging a trench and passing pressure through a pipe, not dissimilar to the fiber network. So there's a lot of opportunity. Wow. It's big plays, you need a lot of capital, you need a lot of backing to do it. But that's kind of where our head's at. It's like there's a big problem to solve. Yeah, water's a way bigger problem than electricity if we don't get it right. We can all live without electricity. There's ways of creating generation, even if it is through diesel generators at like worst case scenario. We've all experienced prolonged outages of water, not being able to cook, not being able to clean, not being able to bath your children, not being able to flush toilets. Like it's crippling, and it's our most precious resource for everything, and we need to make sure we protect that, and that's kind of our entry point into the category, really.
Sure, it's absolutely fascinating, and in light of that, obviously understanding your story and Versofy in a sense is just looking to really solve, one, the solar problem, and two, the water problem, and ultimately that's the best premise for starting any business. is to ultimately solve a problem for the end user. And in light of that, if there's a young person watching this particular episode and they've heard your story, they understand that you're trying to solve a real problem in South Africa, particularly we're obviously in the Johannesburg context. If you had to give a young person advice, what would you say to them in terms of starting a new business in South Africa today?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Like, just Google pitch deck template as an example. Slide number 1 is what problem are you solving? And both previous iterations of this business, being the classifieds and the solar, the storage business, if I had to be honest with myself, weren't solving a big enough problem. You in your mind, you try and create this pitch deck that you're going to pitch to investors to amplify this problem that you're solving. And yes, every business is solving a problem. But my advice to any young entrepreneur coming up is like, find the biggest problem that you can find and try and solve that. And you don't need to solve the whole problem. It's impossible to solve the whole big problem naturally. But find a sliver and solve that. And it doesn't need to be like groundbreaking, big, like industrial utility scale, which is what we're trying to solve. It could be as simple as like, I don't know, I see some very cool ideas around, I don't know, like food delivery, or there's always a queue outside a bathroom. Like, why does that happen? Like it could be anything as simple like as your day-to-day commute. We all see these problems again and again, and like people just don't solve them because I think we get into this fallacy of like, well, if it hasn't been solved already, people have definitely tried and haven't done it. But I find that to be false the majority of the time. I think no one's actually just given it the effort to look at something and be like, cool, how do we fix this? And then it becomes so obvious when you see the kind of end product that someone has then solved, and you're like, oh, obviously, So my advice would be like, pick a big problem, and then really, really try to find a solve for that problem. But it needs to be a big enough problem that people will pay you for. So to go back to that example, like, I love the guys who, queue for you at home affairs. Like, we've all been there, we've all sat on the lines, we're like, this is the worst, it's the most efficient. Someone's like, oh, I'll take that off your hands, and they're selling convenience. You're not having to take a day off work to go to home affairs. Cool, we've solved that problem for you. So it doesn't need to be, as I said, like groundbreaking, but there has to be a market for it. There has to be enough people who are willing to pay you for that problem to go away. So that would be my advice.
Wow. And then just on a final note, if there was one thing in your daily routine that you would never take out, what would it be?
I think exercise, to be honest. So this is new to me. It's not new to me. I grew up, I played every sport I could. I was super active throughout university. And then you like get to this age, and then all of a sudden you look back and like it's stopped, and it does generally coincide with having children. Like, as soon as I had my daughter, and it coincided with the business hitting like hyper growth and like super hectic. Didn't have time for exercise. Well, thought I didn't have time for exercise, and then 3 years goes by and you're like, you maintain, but you're not like putting the effort that you need to. And I've started to get into this routine. I'm not a morning person naturally. I admire morning people. I've always wanted to be one, but I'm not one naturally. And I find like a good groove in the evening where I can work from 8 at night till 1 in the morning. But it's not sustainable doing that either, because then you're tired the next day and you just like get into a negative start. And I've tried to be quite deliberate about changing that. And it's amazing how, even not being a morning person, once you start to wake up at the same time and go to bed at the same time, and then all of a sudden you're awake, like your body clock adjusts extremely quickly. So I've started, and it's I think the benefits are widely researched and documented, but getting up early, getting your exercise in, getting fresh air, going for a run, clearing your mind, just sets you up for the rest of the day. And it's just those small little wins in the morning. So like also COVID, like make your bed every morning. Like it sounds like a menial thing, but it just sets your day off right. And if you don't do that, I never don't do that. Like I will always make the bed and like leave the room in a way you want to come back to it. And it's just like you just win the morning basically. Don't always get it right. There's obviously things that crop up, and trying to go to bed at the same time, you've got a wedding, like cool, you're not going to go to bed at the same time that night. But just getting into these routines, I mean, you mentioned it before we started filming, how you're a person of routine. I think people are creatures of habit. Set yourself up to win, basically. And for me, that's getting up, training in the morning, and just getting started is the recipe, I think, for success, hopefully.
Wow, that's so awesome. And Ross, I really, really appreciate your time. Obviously, you've shared a very long journey that you've been on. Obviously, there's lots of exciting things ahead of you. So I do really appreciate you sharing the Versofy story. Obviously, you guys have got into water now, and that's exciting, and how you're going to change that particular industry, and you're having a huge impact on the solar space. So yeah, just thank you so much for your time and sharing your story.
Likewise, yeah, thank you for inviting me. You've had a great repertoire of people who've come on before me on this podcast. So yeah, I'm very humbled and honored to be invited. Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. Thank you.
Cool.
Awesome.
Cheers.